Hello, everyone, friends, peers, colleagues. A lot of you I have connected and spoken over Zoom for the last 3 years and perhaps longer. It's actually really nice to meet each one of you in person. So thank you really for making it here. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time. At the core of it, like Sneha mentioned, Kula is really a platform to build community. This time round, we are bringing together the many good folks who supported us to build Business of Handmade second edition. 200 Million's very own flagship property that uncovers different issues impacting India's artisan economy and is published as a public good. A lot of you have referred to it, a lot of you are featured on it, and that's really our foray into research. India's creative economy, we don't really talk about it. India's creative economy is driven by its many diverse cultures and is teeming with potential today. Recent reports say, just to give you numbers, because we deal in numbers, that 10% of the GDP of any emerging economy is going to be driven by the creative and cultural industries. That, by 2030, that's no small number. And if you don't have a portfolio, and if you are an investor or a funder, you should have a portfolio for India's creative economy and cultural economy. We want to offer you a glimpse of the potential through Kula, and that's why we're all here. We hope Kula will become a starting point for many of us to build the bridges needed to put India's creative and cultural industries and its cultural economy, specifically its creative, manufacturing, and handmade sector, on the global map. When our team at 200 Million Artisans, or 200M, as we like to call it, set out to study the financing needs of craft-led enterprises and MSMEs in India back in September 2021, we found supporters from so many walks of life. And we are a very young organization, but there were investors, there were enterprises, there were ecosystem actors. They all came together and they believed in the potential of this report. And that's really this edition of Business of Handmade, which we'll launch shortly, has seen collaboration from the entire sector and outside of it like I have never seen before. We would not be standing here, and I don't think Mansi is here, but we would really not be standing here had Mansi Parvatikar from Yunus Social Fund Yunus Social Business Fund Bengaluru, it's a mouthful, hadn't said to me, Priya, we really need to advocate for this report and share its insights. Let's do something about it, and we are here to support you. And honestly, that's how Kula was born. And I reached out to Meera Guradia and Neelam Chhabra, the second two people I reached out to, and they didn't even blink a second to say, okay, we need to support this. Thereafter, I reached out to Mr. Sanjay Anandram from NICE-ORG. Once again, did not think twice about supporting Kula and coming together. So really, Creative Dignity, Yunus, YSSB, and NICE are the kind of collaborators and co-hosts that I am genuinely grateful to have. And you will see a lot more of what they have also built together as the day goes along. A huge thank you to our sponsors and supporters. The Nudge Institute has played a very, very active role in 200 Million Artisans' journey in not only contributing to the report, but also guiding 200M's journey in the last 1 year. So thank you, Nudge, and your entire team, which has been incredible in supporting this effort. Accenture, who took a chance on us, really, thanks to Craftisan Foundation and Mayura Subramaniam. And last but not the least, Zebras Unite Co-op, whose approaches and values on enterprise building and community building we continue to endorse. At 200M, we also see ourselves, like I said, as bridge builders. Bridges between investors and ecosystem actors, bridges between policymakers and the ecosystem, and even intergenerational bridges that are critical now more than ever. And we've lost, the reason why I say intergenerational bridges is because we've really lost many of the stalwarts who came before us, who laid the foundation for the handmade sector as we know today. Elaben Bhatt, I'd like to acknowledge the incredible contributions of Elaben Bhatt of Seva, whose writings on the 100 Mile community are relevant to us even today. We would also like to acknowledge the contributions of Jasleen Thamija, Ruby Pal Chaudhary, and many others, honestly, whose work is the foundation on which we build today. Our works really stands in that sense on what everyone before us has built. It includes also diverse artisan communities who still remain the repositories of traditional knowledge, sustainable ways, and stories that matter. Incidentally, let me tell you a story. 200 million artisans, our name was quite controversial when we first started. You know, there were a lot of people who reached out to me and said, oh, there are no 200 million artisans, where did you get the number? What most people don't know is that it was actually signed off by Geeta Ram, the chairperson of the Crafts Council of India, my mentor, my bestie, and the reason why I continue to stay inspired to work in craft even today. Thank you, Geeta. Our advocacy for data as 200 million artisans draws heavily from the incredible work of Mr. Ashoke Chatterjee over the years. We're incredibly honored to have both of them join us today at our first Kula. Thank you so much. And with that, thank you. I know it's very early, but a lot of you are friends, colleagues, supporters. I am incredibly grateful for you, each one of you, to have made the time to come here. And now to officially declare the conclave open, may I call upon stage Mr. Ashoke Chatterjee, Geeta Ram, Neelam Chibbar, Aparna Upaluri, Sanjay Anandram, Meera Goradia. I don't think Sudha is here, but Subhashi, would you like to come on stage? Anyone from UNIS? YSSP? I think they're coming late. Anyone from Accenture? So we are lighting a lamp, as we always do, but it's a very different kind of lamp to really also acknowledge the diversity of our country, but also, you know, sort of commit to collaborating. I think Kula is about committing to collaborate. So, Mrs. Chatterjee, please come, and I'll wave the lamp. Yeah, it's just a switch. And could we invite all of you to sign on the lamp? And as the, the day progresses, all the speakers who come on board, please sign on the lamp in solidarity to commitment and collaboration. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, with that, it's time to start the sessions for the day. And I would like to once again invite Mr. Ashoke Chatterjee, who's been a guide, a champion of our work, and really is perhaps one of the reasons why the handmade sector has come this far. So to give you a brief introduction, Professor Ashoke Chatterjee has a background in the engineering industry, international civil service, Indian Tourism Development Corporation, and 25 years in the service of the National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad, where he was the executive director, senior faculty, distinguished fellow, and professor of communication and management. He has served a range of development institutions in India and overseas, particularly in the sectors of drinking water, sanitation, disability, livelihoods, and education, as well as working with artisans in many parts of the country. He was also the honorary president of the Crafts Council of India for over 20 years and continues to serve the Crafts Council of India. I tweaked your intro a bit and stole something from CCI. What many might not be aware is that Mr. Chatterjee led the Crafts Council of India to commission the Craft Economics and Impact Study, the CEIS, which was a watershed study in the understanding of the economic contribution of the sector to livelihoods, dignity, and self-reliance. Out of this effort emerged a dialogue opened up with the Government of India. In 2012, the Planning Commission and the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation acknowledged the need to collect reliable data on the size and contribution of crafts and handlooms to India's economy. The sector was for the first time included in the 2012-2016 sixth economic census in the history of India. Please welcome Mr. Ashoke Chatterjee, former director, author, former director of NID, author, industry expert, and yeah, one of our guides and champions. Thank you for coming. Yeah. All yours, sir.
Please don't be worried about this big sheaf of papers. I don't intend to impose it all on you. Thank you very much. Could we have the first, yeah, just keep that on there for a while. I'm going to race through a presentation put together on the cultural and creative industry, particularly from the context of the craft sector, because as background to this discussion that we're having today, I understand from Priya and her colleagues that the major purpose of this conclave is to look at the financing systems that are required to take creative industries, India's creative industries forward. And that is absolutely critical because without finance we can do nothing. What may be important to understand is why should we be concerned at all? And I thought it might be important to remember that everything we're talking about and everything we do is ultimately about people like Onkar Lalji, who is a weaver from Rajasthan, and with whom I have worked for 50 years. When I first met Onkar Lalji, he and his family were eating once in 2 days. Because of their caste, they were denied access to the village well in Rajasthan, in a drought area of Rajasthan. So you can imagine what that meant. And the purpose of the intervention that brought us together was to see if there's anything that the new institutions, in this case, the Indian Institute of Management Ahmedabad and the National Institute of Design, and later other partners, is there anything that we knew that could help Onkar Lalji and others like him in that part of Rajasthan to eat twice in 1 day, to have access to the village well, and to be able to do those things without depending on NID, IIM, or other outsiders. And this experiment, which has been going on for 50 years, is an experiment in self-reliance. And basically, it is also an experiment in human rights and in dignity. So you can put this off for the moment. When we are talking about this sector, please remember that at the end of the day, it's somewhere between 200 and 250 million people like Onkar Lalji, who are not statistics, they're human beings, and who have been neglected, taken for granted, and oppressed for centuries. When Onkar Lalji and I first met, his son dismissed the whole effort as saying, we don't want to be associated with this profession. It's the badge of our shame. So you can go on talking about this, but what we want is to be able to dress like your NID students in T-shirts and jeans and move away from here, where no one knows who we are and doesn't ask our caste, and where we can live with dignity. So dignity became the benchmark for this whole effort. Onkar Lalji brought up his sons and daughters, was very proud that his son became an accountant, kept on weaving, but became an accountant, got a job in the ICICI Bank in Ajmer, big breakthrough. And 6 weeks ago, he lost his son, who was killed in an accident at the Beawa railway station. This story of him and his son and others like him in that community had been the lodestar that had kept us going for 50 years. And I didn't know what to say to him. So when I finally got in touch with him, and I said, how are you? And he said, I'm weaving. So I said, okay, what are you going to do now? He said, well, I have grandchildren to bring up. I have a daughter-in-law whose future is now in my hands. And I will go to my loom and ask it what I should do. So remember, we're talking about cultural and creative industries. This is the culture. A man in this situation goes to his loom to reflect and decide how to proceed further. This is important to understand because often we get caught in the nitty-gritty of talking about startups and finance and so on. Well, is he a startup? Are these 200 to 250 million artisan startups? They've been at it for thousands of years. It's we who are the startups. And it's we who have to support them. Now, there's some bit of a schizophrenia, perhaps, or something in the whole effort that we're doing here this morning, and that's fine, because that's what we Indians are, actually. But we're talking about cultural and creative industries, but this is 200 million, which means craft. The cultural and creative sector is much, much larger. We are focusing today, I think, on the craft component of this phrase, which is still new to India, called creative and cultural industries. New to India, but not to the rest of the world. And we are far behind, although we represent, and here's another contradiction, possibly the world's largest creative and cultural resource. And yet, we don't use this phrase, and there is nobody in Karnataka or in New Delhi who is in charge of this sector. And yet, the sector is so huge that a few years ago, when Geeta and I and others were doing the advocacy of an exercise which I will refer to, at that time, this is before COVID, the cultural and creative industry sector was larger than petroleum and larger than the armaments industry globally. But we don't know anything about it. We don't even know whether that figure of 200 million is accurate because we don't count them. We don't count him. We managed to get, I think you can take poor Omkarlalji off the screen, can you? The official number of artisans in this country varies between 11 to 13 million. The actual number, according to Ravi Venkatesan, former Microsoft chairman, is 250 million. This is in a country which is the world's largest resource of its kind. And we don't even know whether the number of people in this sector is 13 or 250. That's the absurdity of it all. The world's largest resource of artisanal talent doesn't even know how many they are. And just before COVID, when we were struggling to launch the project, which is finally, with corporate support, we're able to do a counting exercise, which I'll come to very briefly, we were told by an official in the ministry, which is in charge of this sector, that India's craft sector is too small to warrant any major accounting exercise. And this is after the government of India, as a result of civil society pressure, was able to get artisans into the economic census, as you just heard, for the very first time in 2013. And the Ministry of Statistics said that the outcome of this census indicates broadly the enormous scope of this huge industry of which we know very little. And it demands a census specific to handmade in India. But we cannot do that unless we have a methodology that can somehow make some sense out of this diverse, gray and scattered, huge sector. For example, do we include brick making, papers, chutney? Are they crafts? So what is a craft and who is an artisan and what should we be counting? But the official intervention was, it's too small to matter. So a group of people from NGOs found their only champions to be statisticians in the Ministry of Statistics, the only ones who cared, and who have encouraged us to continue and to pursue until we can develop a methodology which we can then hand to them and say, now do it on a national scale. Get this sector into national systems of accounting. Because unless we achieve that, who is going to invest in a sector which doesn't have data? Which investor will put money in unless you can give some hard data? So just now, the challenge has been to develop a methodology that can be used by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation to assess the scale and contribution of artisans to the national economy. This is taking place 75 years after Gandhiji brought us freedom, in which the crafts was central to the freedom movement. So just absorb the absurdity of what I am saying. 75 years after freedom, 75 years after crafts, the charkha, khadi, village industries was at the very center of the freedom movement. We don't know what that center is or what it's contributing. So we are in a strange situation here today. We're talking about finance for this sector. We're talking about one component of creative and cultural industries, which is craft, possibly the largest component, but still only one. So the tail is wagging the dog. So whatever you hear today, remember we're talking about one part of this huge sector. And the other crazy thing is that the concept of creative and cultural industries was first articulated in India, in Jodhpur, in 2005. And I have a piece of paper here which I'll be happy to make available to you. You can also go online and find it. The Jodhpur Consensus of 2005. This is a United Nations document, stamped by the World Bank, UNDP, UNESCO, and others. And we have done nothing about implementing this consensus. And we are now 17 years after the Jodhpur Consensus. And in the latest government intervention, which is the G20 Working Group on Creative and Cultural Industries, the Jodhpur Consensus of 2005 is not even mentioned. So in the mandarins in Delhi who sit down and put these documents together seem to have forgotten that what the G20 is talking about was articulated on Indian soil in 2005. So, like so much else in India, one absurdity after the other. But we have to keep going, because there are 250 million people like Onkar Lalji who are dependent on us. And what have they just come through? They've come through COVID. 3 years loss of income. 3 years where you would think they would have given up and lost hope. Why? Because just before COVID, they were hit by GST. And they were told, sitting in his village in Ajmer district, which hardly gets any power, that they would have to fill out GST forms, for which they needed a computer and an accountant. If that horror was not bad enough, just previous to that, there was demonetization done overnight in an industry which depends on cash transactions. Smash them again. Then came COVID. Industry after industry rushed to Delhi to get attention. Not even half an hour was spent to understand the position of people like Onkar Lalji and millions like him from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. Not even half an hour of what was this terrible pandemic going to do to India's craft industry. Apparently too small. Nirmala Sitharaman is on record of saying, I don't know much about the informal sector. Hello, you're the finance minister. 90% of India's earnings are from the informal sector. I don't know much about it, says she, but I'll be happy to hear. This is the situation that we are in. And I'll go through a presentation very quickly with you, pausing in a few places where I think there may be issues that later Priya and her colleagues and others who are in this room might like to pick up and take this further. But I think what is important is that although our focus is on finance, please understand that finance is for human beings like Onkar Lalji and millions like him. And it is about their creativity. It is about their culture. And it is about their sense of community. Because that is what has brought this craft tradition down over 5,000 years, if not more, in a society, this subcontinent is the only unbroken history of craft over 5, 7, 8,000 years, depending on when you date the Indus Valley and that civilization. Unbroken. Unbroken. China too had it, but the Cultural Revolution, they smashed their crafts. And now they are trying to recover this. When Geeta and I and other colleagues began this effort on counting artisans, we were told at the highest levels of decision making in this country that this is a sunset industry. Don't waste your time. Crafts belongs in museums. Okay. Yes, festivals of India, we'll drag them out. They can be doing things, and it's nice to have crafts around, but it has no future. We were told it has nothing to do with India's status as a world power. Those were the words that were used to me. A few months later, the World Crafts Council held its meeting in China. And the gentleman who came from Beijing to open the conference said, and this was translated in Chinese, that China had identified two industries critical to its rise as a world power. One was IT, the other one was craft. And he said, these are our sunrise industries. Manju Nirula and I and others heard this phrase, or now translated, sunrise. We had just heard the phrase sunset. So we went running to the translation booth to say, did we actually hear this correctly? Did the gentleman say sunrise? And we said, yes, he did. Why do you ask? So we said, very interesting. We come from a country where we've been told it's sunset. And they said, no. We destroyed our crafts during the Cultural Revolution. We smashed our looms and our wheels and everything else. And now we are trying desperately to bring it back. Why are you doing it? Because creativity and innovation is the only source of survival in today's competitive market. And the seeds of creativity and innovation are in the craft sector. You destroy the crafts, you destroyed your creative and innovative advantage. And that brought us to remember that only a few years before this, from the European Union came a slogan that the future is handmade, exactly for the same reasons. So we have this advantage. Hopefully we'll be able to discuss some of its dimensions in greater detail during the course of the day and what follows. But I want to read out a line, finally, from the Jodhpur Consensus, which about what this sector really does or is. And what it says is, what cultural industries have in common is that they create content, use creativity, skill, and in some cases, intellectual property to produce goods and services with social and cultural meaning. Hang on to that, social and cultural meaning. And that social and cultural meaning comes from people like Onkar Lalji, who goes back to his loom when his son is killed to take strength to continue. So let's discuss some of these things in some detail when we have our open discussions. But keep in mind that at the end of the day, this is about human beings and a resource that they represent, which is a legacy of thousands of years. And that no other country has these national treasures. And perhaps no other country treats its national treasures in the terrible way that we have treated people like Ungar Lalji. Thank you.